Welcome to a really cool and a really exciting episode of Science News. Today, I want to talk about a recent study that was published in the journal Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, which examined the effects of psychedelic experiences on people years after the actual drug trip. The study found that psychedelic experiences could have profound effects on the mind, and these psychedelic experiences could be induced by consuming substances like psilocybin mushrooms, lysergic acid diethylamide, or NN-dimethyltryptamine, or as they're more commonly known, magic mushrooms, LSD, and DMT, or ayahuasca if it's made into a liquid brew. All of these psychedelic substances have the chemical capacity to profoundly alter our brain chemistry, and thus our mood, and our sensorial and psychological perception of the world around us. Depending on the dosage and the substance, you can perceive visual and audio hallucinations, or even experience something called ego death. It can be an intense and profoundly intimate, life-changing experience, and research has found that this can cause personality changes that last for weeks, months, sometimes years or decades, and even lifetimes. Now, all of this may sound incredibly terrifying, especially ego death, whatever that is, and it might seem astonishing that anyone would risk taking a drug that's so powerful and can have such profound effects on you. And yet all of this data, anecdotal and especially empirical, suggests that these personality changes lean overwhelmingly towards the positive. They offer constructive lessons or inspiration for personal growth that ultimately leads to a happier, more satisfied person. The study that I want to talk about is a meta-analysis study, which examined the results of 18 previous studies that ranged as far back in time as 1985, and that all looked at the effects of psychedelics on some part of the human experience. The researchers compiled this data to create a larger picture of scientific understanding of the psychedelic experience and how it affects humans. These studies looked at people who were clinically depressed, people who had mental illnesses, and people who were otherwise fine. They didn't have any of these conditions. They were, as the statistician would say, normal. On a biochemical level, the results of this meta-analysis study found that serotonergic psychedelics work as agonists at cortical 5-HT2A receptors, which are expressed all around the cortex. This is part of the reason why the psychedelic experience is so strange, because all of these different parts of the brain that usually don't communicate with each other are now in communication. This free-for-all of communication in the brain, of the flow of sensory information, leads to altered perception of our senses, and altered modes of thought, and old things or things that we're used to seem new again, undiscovered. There's a novelty to daily life that can make people have deep and important changes in their perspective. These 5-HT2A receptors also appear to be involved in modulating the long-term personality changes that come from both acute and long-term psychedelic consumption. They found that compared to people who didn't have a psychedelic experience at all, people who took psychedelics showed more of a personality trait called openness, which is a greater appreciation for new experiences. About depression, the researchers' findings mirrored those of a more recent study that was published in late 2016, which found that more than 80% of people had clinically significant decreases in their depression and their anxiety, and 83% showed increases in life satisfaction. Now, these are overwhelmingly good results, and it's important to understand that it doesn't mean that the other 20 or 17% had bad experiences and increases in their anxiety. They could have experienced, for example, no change in their depression or anxiety. Maybe their feelings were only temporarily aggravated for a short time. It's actually a statistical rarity. It's very, very rare that someone has a long-lasting negative psychedelic experience. And in these cases, it's most often due to people consuming these substances irresponsibly, not taking heed of set and setting, and taking a psychedelic substance where they aren't comfortable. And this is very bad. This can be dangerous because psychedelics make you very vulnerable. And so taking them where you're not comfortable or around people you don't trust or where you can get lost It's not a good idea, and these are the things that can lead to people having bad experiences. But if psychedelics are taken appropriately and with respect, the experience is almost universally positive, immensely positive. There's even the oftenly described feeling of self-transcendence, or out-of-body experiences, as well as entheogenic experiences, which are hallucinations or psychedelically magnified emotions or thoughts that the user perceives as divine or sacred. This can include feelings of ego death, which I mentioned earlier. And ego death is basically where your perception of your ego, your understanding of who you are, Bob Jones working in society with a job and a reputation, that gets deconstructed and shown to you to be an illusion. And during ego death, this sense of who you are kind of melts away, and it doesn't disappear, but rather it joins with everything around you, and you feel this amazing oneness with the natural world that exists all around you. You see past these barriers and these words that people use to define tree or plant or animal or human, with skin as the barrier to our body. This ego death experience can make people see beyond that. They see trees and animals and the air that they breathe as one continuous flow of matter, and they are just part of it, an entropic eddy in the stream, if you will. This is described as an overwhelmingly beautiful and amazingly peaceful experience. About 70% of people in this more recent study, the one published in late 2016, described their psychedelic experience as one of the top 5 most spiritually significant events, or most meaningful experiences in their lives. This entheogenic quality of psychedelics has contributed greatly to the anecdotal lore that surrounds psychedelics. And this anecdotal lore, if one cares to read into it, is full of stories of personal growth, of self-discovery, of hope and help for depression and existential anxiety. There are stories of people being made by the psychedelic experience to address problems in their life head-on, and it helps them realize solutions or find healthier behaviors. People largely describe psychedelics as being a chemical vehicle for personally realizing a better way to live, with more care and more love for yourself and for the people around you, as well as the environment and the natural world that you live within. The researchers say that the data suggests that these psychedelic experiences, quote, seem to induce therapeutic effects that should be further explored in randomized controlled studies, unquote. Now, I agree, that's very important. In studies like this, plus all of the legal and scientific work that's put in by people like Rick Doblin with his organization MAPS, or the Multidisciplinary Association of the Psychedelic Studies, they're really creating a sea change in the scientific and the legal perception of these substances. Hopefully, in the future, we'll be able to see a greater use of these profoundly effective chemicals to reap the full potential of their medicinal and spiritual benefits.